Buonasera.
Buonasera.
Thank you very much, Professor Giovanni, and I hope he did not bore you with my long CV. It means that I'm getting older, but maybe it's good, but anyways, thank you very much for this opportunity another time, because you bring me back to academia, because I always say that I'm a mixture of a scholar, practitioner / activist, and this is why I'm here today. But also, again, I'm very happy to be able to interact with you, and thank you very much for your interest. The title of the presentation today, or our meeting, is the EU and Palestine, Destined Disillusionment or Potential Remedy. I will try to bring a Palestinian perspective. I just wanted to let you know a bit about this, the first slide, when I was trying to think of some visuals, because I'm not that good in visuals, but I tried. It's a bit black, but it has a wall that has a lot of interconnectedness, and that actually reflects the way I see the world today, not only the EU. The second slide, and I wanted to introduce this to you. I know that the Palestine issue has come into surface again strongly after the 7th of October in 2023. This is the Palestinian flag. Every single part of this flag represents something. The black represents the difficulties and the dimness around the Palestinian present and perhaps future. The dogs, they're trying to fly, but they are being scratched by the blood. The red, the ongoing war against the Palestinians, and also the olive, branch, which represents hope and peace. Well. Today's discussion, I will try to discuss concerns about the EU's role in the Palestine-Israel conflict, how it started, where it is today, and whether there still is a chance.
You have to wait 2 minutes because they don't see.
Sorry.
Yes,
it
is blocked. I don't know why.
Okay. So the Palestinian flag is blocked?
The Palestinian flag.
Nothing new. Okay. Okay. No problem, no. Anyways, I hope to have as many questions at the end of the presentation as possible, because it is always very important to hear your perspective, because I'm sure that it is different than mine, and I would love to learn from you. Thank you. They saw the first slide, yeah? No. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, so it's not only the slide.
Okay, we can restart.
So now?
Yes.
So now you can see the flag?
Yes.
I don't need to repeat, do I? Okay. I mean, this is the flag that I keep close to my heart because I think that it is very representative of our, our condition. Well, as I have started, we will try to discuss concerns regarding the EU's role in the Palestine-Israel conflict, how it started, where it is today, and whether there still is a chance to shift its course of action and influence the outcome of the conflict. When I started examining the EU-Palestine relations, I really found out historically that over 40 years after the 1980 Venice Declaration, and despite the pretense of a consistent EU policy supporting the Palestinian people and their national aspirations, the conflict has reached a turning point contradictory to the EU's desired outcome for the two-state solution. How can we define the EU's motivation and role since then? Is it going to be a realist and political role or an idealist moral role? Or a pioneering and independent role as a player in the 1980 Venice Declaration, confirming the right to self-determination, or a subsidiary role of player? This is what everybody says about the EU, a player, not player. Since the Madrid Peace Conference, Madrid peace process that started in 1991, including the Oslo peace process started in 1994, and the current war on Palestine. Or a reactionary role, basically condemning the occupation, issuing statements, making some measures against settlements and settlement products, as the case in some European countries, or there are certain measures within the EU institutions being taken against the settlement activities, annexations, statements, and statements a bit conflicting about the ongoing genocide since October 8, 2023. Well, just going back a bit, when we look at the EU, I mean, this is what we know from the literature and from what is stated in terms of policies. The EU's mission as a global actor, it states that the EU and its member states are engaged around the world to promote peace, security, and prosperity, as well as the interests of European citizens. To this end, the EU works to prevent and resolve conflicts, to foster resilient democracies, promote human rights, sustainable development, and to bolster a cooperative and rules-based global order. What we learn about the EU's fundamental values is the support and respect for human dignity, human rights, freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law. I think that what we notice is that since the demise of the Cold War in 1991, the EU's perception of its weight in the international system and the official discourse surrounding its foreign and security policy have been articulated in terms of serving as a force for good and having a moral mission in the world. And this is very important to me as a Palestinian. When I'm asked why are you interested in the EU, because I still believe that the EU has a strong potential for a moral mission in the world. The self-perception has grown in the 21st century's first decade and is evident from the European priorities for 2019 and 2024. I mean, taking you back to think about the Venice Declaration and why I think it's extremely important when we try to analyze the evolution of the EU position vis-à-vis the Palestine-Israel conflict. Of course, the EU, the 9 EEC countries, they were very pioneering when they issued this declaration in 1980, when they recognized the need to preserve Palestinians' rights to self-determination and, most importantly, safeguard the Palestinian people's territorial rights against Israel's expansionist policy. Everything that is happening now is completely against this declaration. I mean, just reflecting upon this declaration, and I worked with Professor Giovanni to produce an extensive chapter that will be published later, so you will be finding a lot of details and references to my analysis. I don't want to go deep in that, but just give you some hints about how I see it, how I see its significance. First, basing the declaration on the UN Security Council resolutions 242 and 338, these two resolutions concern the establishment of an Arab state next to the Jewish state, and also regarding the return of refugees. The EEC called for the withdrawal of Israel from the territories occupied in the post-Six-Day War in 1967, and among other things for negotiations toward a just and durable peace in the Middle East. But first, it confirmed the right to self-determination, and not only a peace based on negotiations that I will try to highlight a bit further. The EU confirmed Palestinian rights beyond the self-governing authority prescribed in the 1978 Camp David Accords. I don't know how much you know about the Palestine issue, but the Camp David Accords in 1978 were signed. It was the first peace treaty signed between Israel and an Arab country, which was Egypt. And it established the situation, at least the border situation between both countries. But attached or annexed to that accord was an annex talking about establishing a Palestinian self-governing authority in the West Bank and Gaza. And in my analysis, the roots of the Oslo Accords, the way the Palestinian Authority was established, is actually established on that basis. A self-governing authority without any mention of ending occupation or recognition of the right to self-determination or the establishment of an independent sovereign Palestinian state. So the third most important connotation of the Venice Declaration is the willingness of the EEC member states to resort to the use of force to implement the declaration and reach out to the Middle Eastern nation to initiate the changes. I mean, the resort to the use of force, meaning that the continued occupation presented a threat to world peace and stability, not only regarding the region. And that was very significant. I wish we could just go back to that. But anyways, talking about the evolving EU situation, I mean, in a way, and as it is stated, it is a rules-based solution. This is how the EU views the respect of international law. You know, the resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict continues to be a fundamental interest of the EU. The objective is a two-state solution, as you know now, and the way it has evolved, with an independent, democratic, viable, and contiguous Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with Israel and its neighbors. We will see where we are from that objective. Again, it is something based on international law, but I mean, I have inserted this paragraph just to give you a hint of how it evolved, but in the chapter you will find the exact time reference for this. The EU has systematically, reaffirmed basic principles regarding a viable peace, requiring the creation of a Palestinian state on the 1967 lines with mutually agreed minimal and equal swaps, with Jerusalem as the capital for both states, with security arrangements that address legitimate concerns and respect the sovereignty of each side, with an agreed fair solution to the question of Palestinian refugees. I outlined the words mutually agreed, minimal and equal swaps because this is very much in contradiction with the initial statement. Like not mutually agreed. What the EU wanted is a state on the borders of 1967. When you say mutually agreed, taking into consideration the contextual power asymmetry between the occupier and the occupied, it is almost impossible to agree on a fair solution because in the negotiation experience, Israel was always the stronger party. And I had the opportunity actually to witness and to be involved in negotiations. My first, maybe I can talk a bit about my personal experience here. I was studying at the École Nationale d'Administration in Paris in '94, and I was invited to go assist the Palestinian economic negotiating team with Israel. Just like they wanted me to take minutes, I mean, and it was amazing for me. Like, imagine you go into a meeting where it is historic, everybody was interested in the situation. I was interviewed on the media in France, but I mean, I can never forget that transfixing experience that I had. I went into the room the first time, and I saw the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, and I was completely shocked. It was, that moment that showed the real power asymmetry between both sides. The Israelis were in control, and the Palestinians just wanted to get an agreement. In my PhD thesis, I explain, why the Palestinians went into such subjugated negotiations. Maybe you can. But I was crying all night because it didn't, I couldn't understand what was going on. But I could see it, and so, but that moment was also a very kind of like milestone in my own understanding as a Palestinian living under occupation of the conflict, of its present, future, and then the past. How we got into that moment in history where we signed such a humiliating agreement, And there's a lot to talk about how the Palestinians we didn't negotiate, actually. The Israelis were negotiating with themselves, but the idea was like establish a limited Palestinian self-rule, okay, that continues to be under the control of the Israeli occupation. That was the Oslo Agreement. The problem, if I can say from the Palestinian side, is that of course I worked with most of the leadership that actually negotiated the Oslo agreements, and I interviewed them afterwards. But the idea was that I think, in my humble understanding, the way the Palestinians spoke about, the Palestinian state since '94 was sort of a wishful thinking, because the discourse was that these transitional agreements that would have lasted for 5 years, and then presumed in the permanent status negotiations, were 6 major issues were to be discussed and negotiated with Israel, including the settlements, the right of return, borders, water, Jerusalem, and the Palestinian state. The idea was that we leave those issues to the permanent status negotiations, but we don't talk about the end game. But the Palestinians, they were talking about, okay, these are transitional agreements, and when we sign the permanent status negotiations with Israel, we will have the Palestinian state. But nobody promised the Palestinian state, nobody. And the agreements, okay, they were supposed to be inspired and based on UN Security Council 242 and 338 and what have you, and they were deposited in the United Nations, but they were not in line with the UN resolution. And if you are further interested in looking into the Palestine question, if you analyze the UN resolutions regarding the Palestine-Israel issue, you will see how in the UN, even with the United Nations General Assembly, there were a lot of deviations from the substantial issues and the issue of the right to self-determination. But then again, we go back to the EU. So, since then, we all know that the EU keeps expressing its concerns about developments on the ground, which threaten to make a two-state solution impossible. This is what we hear from everybody. But the two-state solution continues to be the only discourse, the only mantra and slogan that everybody is talking about, but they don't look deep into it and the problems behind this concept, how it was started, what happened to it, and what actually the Middle East peace process and the Oslo agreements meant regarding this two-state solution. So, The EU views that the only way to resolve the conflict is through an agreement that ends the occupation. So you don't do an agreement with the occupier. Either you enforce an agreement according to international law or you don't. So you keep giving us this language, a song that keeps to change tone and tune according to the weather. But so, I mean, having said this, I need to also bring another sort of EU focus, is that what we hear, what we see in statements, also in policy papers, that the solution, a lasting solution, must be achieved based on the UN Security Council resolution, the Madrid principles, including peace, the roadmap for peace, and agreements previously reached by the parties and the Arab Peace Initiative. Just talking, I don't know how much you know about the roadmap, but we'll try to discuss it a bit later. So the EU promises that once there is an end to the conflict, they will have a deepened and enhanced cooperation among all countries in the region. But you know that the EU, for example, has an association agreement with the Palestinian Authority, with the PLO, and also with Israel, as well as with Jordan, etc. And in those association agreements, you know that there are conditions. There's a lot of conditionality in those agreements. We need to really look at the conditions within those association agreements, especially when we think about the EU basing its foreign policy or fundamental values on human rights. And a partner, an associated partner, is by international law, is committing a lot of crimes against humanity and against human rights, etc., including the genocide, and still we did not witness any change in the relationship between the European Union and Israel. Okay. So, just to continue on the parameters that the EU sees, regarding the solution. The EU would like to see an agreement on the borders of the two states based on 1967 lines, with equivalent land swaps as may be agreed between the parties. The EU will recognize changes to the pre-1967 borders, including about Jerusalem, only when agreed by the parties. And this is exactly what I was trying to say. I mean, land swaps is something that is not consistent with, a Palestinian state based on the 1967 borders. Because land swaps will start from where Israel has instituted and consolidated and institutionalized its settlement policy, especially in the West Bank and Jerusalem. You can just go and look at the figures. I think that there's almost 1 million Israeli settlers living in the West Bank and Jerusalem, and they are actually annexing what was agreed upon during the Oslo Agreement in the West Bank, that actually divided the West Bank into 3 areas, Area A, B, and C. Israel is almost annexing 60% of the West Bank in Area C. This is where all the settlements are. And in Area C, and actually I was in Palestine a couple of months ago, and I was going around in Area C, and I could see a lot of annexation and the taking of the land by force from the Bedouins in Area C. We don't see any Bedouins anymore, and they actually expropriate lots of lands. Me and my husband Karim, who's with me today, we bought land in Jericho in Area C, and we are sure that it's going to be expropriated. But this tells you, this is not something that you only see, or it's not theoretical, it's actually happening. again, this, when agreed by the parties, this means that the EU is giving up on the Palestinians' right to self-determination and the rights to sovereignty on the territory of 1967 borders. Security arrangements that for Palestinians respect their sovereignty and show that the occupation is over. I mean, if the occupation is over, there will not be a lot of need for security arrangements. What is happening now is that the Oslo Agreement, it included a part on security, but that's actually the cornerstone of the Oslo Agreements. You see, the agreements were signed in a way to ensure Israel's security. And what happened is that this part, the security part, that is actually being funded still by the EU and heavily by the US administration, despite of the fact that the Palestinian Authority has been weakened and the international aid to the Palestinian Authority has been lessened, but this issue of supporting Palestinian security, especially in the West Bank, is heavily regarded. And also, the point is to make sure that the Palestinian Authority puts down any kind of resistance, especially in the West Bank, so that Israel is being safe. But that's another story. So, and the issue of the refugee issue, I have my own theory about the refugee issue. It still is, Professor Giovanni, maybe this will be my next academic attempt to talk about how the refugee issue in Palestine has been preempted from its own substance since the beginning of the Middle East peace process in '91. And if you look at the region, look at what Israel is doing in Gaza now, for example, 85% of the Gaza people are actually refugees from 1948. Many of them come from the north of Palestine, as well as from my own town or city, from Lod and Jaffa, because I'm a third-generation refugee also. The continuous attack on UNRWA, the United Nations Refugees Works Agency that was established in 1948 to look upon the refugee needs, not only in Palestine, but also the 750,000 Palestinian refugees who were displaced in 1948 from their own country. Whether they are in Jordan, Syria, and also in Palestine. So, with the time, 75 years, I think that there has been a premeditated issue to preempt this issue from its substance and the need to end. If you follow the news, it has been a very hard war on UNRWA. And also the refugees, because the Israelis, and this also goes back to the Trump administration, also the Abraham Accord. The intention was not to talk anymore about Palestinian refugees. We end them, and the situation now in Gaza, with the right-wing leaders within the Israeli government, their formula for the Palestinian refugees is either you die, or you leave, or you agree to live under our subjugation. That's the only formula. There is no other formula happening. And actually, I don't know also if you follow the news, they have been actually burning the refugees tents in Gaza, and we are still watching the live genocide. But anyways, so again, this talking about the status of Jerusalem, that's another story, because also with the annexation and with the deep state in Israel and the way they treat Palestinian residents in Jerusalem to make them go away, because parts of the Palestinians who stayed in Jerusalem who did not go, they have a different status than Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. They have an Israeli identity card, and this allows them to move freely. But what happened is that pushing the Palestinians living in Gaza, playing on the demographic aspect, they have pushed them further towards Ramallah, also the city where I live now. There's sort of a no man's land where almost like maybe 400,000 Palestinians who are supposed to be Jerusalem residents, they live in that area because they cannot afford living in Jerusalem because of heavy taxations, a lot of policies to push them away, they cannot build houses, etc. And there's another also institutionalized kind of policy to strip those Jerusalemites out of their ID cards and their rights, because they're not living in Jerusalem, so we take their cards away, so they are no longer from Jerusalem. So that's another chapter in this ongoing. So anyways, as a reminder, the EU continues to take a range of political and practical activities, but we need to also look at the political activities the effectiveness of those political activities. But it remains the largest donor to what was supposed to be the Palestinian state building efforts, aiming at a Palestinian state and respect of the rule of law. There's a lot of literature in political science and international relations challenging, the EU's efforts in state building. Do you do state building before the end of occupation, or do you think that state building can? That was the title of my PhD, state building as a path to statehood under occupation. It's almost impossible because, what the interest should be in ending the occupation and not necessarily, to do state building. For example, if you do state building and you want to start teaching people about human rights, how can you convince the population or the young generation on the concepts of human rights while they are being treated in a very, anti-human rights way? People cannot move from the West Bank to Jerusalem. A lot of people, there's the Oslo generation, like since 1994, all the young Palestinians, they have never been to Jerusalem. So it's another way, not only doing, challenging state building, but it is also, if we continue with this discourse, we encourage also sort of like a continuation of wiping the memory, the cultural memory of the population, wiping their connections with their history. I even don't know who the young Palestinian is. Like they don't understand. A lot of people, they think that their world revolves around, Ramallah in the West Bank. They've never been to Jerusalem. This is one additional fact in addition to you may have seen that there's a lot of rising consciousness and solidarity with the Palestinians, but from my observation, if you dig deep into those minds of many of those youths, they don't know enough about their history, because also, as an example, if you allow me, Giovanni, the efforts to contribute to state building were very much conditional. If we want to support the development of Palestinian curricula, you have to change the history books to the likes of the Israelis. And there's a lot of monitoring even from the EU on Palestinian history books. So we're not allowed to talk about occupation. I've heard that now, after the Abraham Accords between Israel and, a lot of countries in the Gulf that have signed the agreements, slowly they are changing their history books. So the young generation, they are not being taught about history, and yet they contribute to the demonstrations. But look at this dangerous policy. You are wiping out history, you are changing educational facts, and you are not allowing, you are not allowing the young generation to know facts. Distorted type of policies. So, I mean, I tried to talk a bit about where the EU went wrong, but basically the way I see it is that, in some, first, the EU abandoned its position as the 1980 Venice Declaration articulated. Second, as I spoke a bit, the EU should have attempted to thoroughly assess the validity of the Middle East peace process and its role in the post-Oslo era. And this is something extremely important. You will find extensive explanation about it in the chapter. And the EU yielded to a narrow interpretation of the facts on the ground. That's my phone, sorry. They'll leave it now, they will stop. Abandoning its position since the Venice Declaration. Is it okay to take it off?
Yeah.
Sorry. That's the price of living in too many words. Okay. So, when we talk about abandoning its position since the Venice Declaration, the EU moved from a firm belief in the need to fulfill the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people to practice self-determination and freedom from occupation to a contingent commitment to creating and recognizing a Palestinian state when appropriate. This to me is devastating, This shift implies that the EU has linked its support to the two-state solution, to realizing Palestinian rights, to a circumstantial condition, when appropriate. Who decides when it is appropriate, rather than reaffirming Palestinian statehood as a direct outcome of realizing the right to self-determination and obviously the end to the occupation, which is actually a settler colonial occupation. It is not just like a random occupation. The idea of the Israeli occupation is to just get rid of as many Palestinians as possible and establish an exclusive Jewish state. Moreover, I wanted also to highlight a bit about the Seville Declaration that reckoned that the parties on their own cannot find a solution and that there is an urgent need for political action by the whole international community that sets a realistic and well-defined timescale for a political solution. Is that the EU, in the beginning, in the Venice Declaration, this is, I apologize for this. I'm not that good with technology. خلاص اطلع بره. كريم اطلع بره. اطلع بره. Okay. So, this is again, settling the conflict only through negotiations is contradictory. But the Seville Declaration was okay because it said, it's, in the Venice Declaration, the EU wanted to resort to the use of force, the EEC, to enforce a solution. Now the EU is saying, well, okay, we need more help with the whole international community. And then they say political action by the international community to assume responsibility for acting. Nonetheless, again, as I said, when you talk about this sentence, sometimes you may not notice it, but if you dig deeper into it, as I have said, negotiations between an occupying power and an occupied population will never be a negotiation over a just solution. It's always going to favor the stronger party. And actually, to tell you frankly, I have worked a lot with EU officials, and they know this, but they don't know much about it, unfortunately. The other wrong interpretation of the of the EU position is the failure to assess the Middle East peace process. Since '91. So the Middle East peace process has a lot of problems inside the wordings, like for example the notion of land for peace, that I also found very problematic. I mean, it is not simple to talk about it, but you will see it also in a lot of the literature documenting what that process was and what the parties agreed upon and what the EU and other countries talk about, the issue of land for peace. I mean, for me, I find it problematic because, if you talk about ending the occupation and establishing a Palestinian state on the borders of 1967, this means that there are defined borders. I mean, land swaps to start from where they have ended now, and land for peace, like, okay, you give me peace, I give you land. But if after all the annexation that happened, you will give me land, I mean, we're trying to talk about what land, might be the land for what they call a viable Palestinian state. And actually what is happening now, especially in the West Bank, the Israeli right movement, the settlers, they are working towards establishing a Jewish state in the West Bank. I mean, they claim that they don't recognize the divisions and the Oslo agreements, and they consider the West Bank and now Gaza as part of the Greater Israel. And Greater Israel, by the way, is not only on the borders of the current Israel. I think that nobody has really noticed the map. I wanted to bring that map to you, but look it up. The map that Netanyahu carried in his statement at the UN General Assembly last year, in 2023, just before the war. Okay? That land depicted the Greater Israel. Greater Israel goes beyond what is now Palestine, historic Palestine. It goes towards Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Damascus, Lebanon, and partly towards Cyprus and a bit toward Greece. That's the, I have my own theory about this thinking, but so again, when we talk about UN Security Council resolutions, it keeps to be challenging because even though the EU states that it supports this, but there is no direct intervention to enforce it. The third aspect in this thing, and which was really also very transformative to me, I mean, especially when looking at the EU, is its membership in what was called the Roadmap for Peace in the Middle East. That Roadmap for Peace in the Middle East was initiated by the US in 2002, just after the second Palestinian uprising or intifada. And that was supposed to be a map that they would resume talks on the Middle East peace process, especially in Palestine. But in that role, I found that the EU has actually, by agreeing to be part of the quartet, even though the roadmap refers to the respective UN resolutions and the Middle East peace process, the EU became a party to another international entity that has inherently sidelined the essence of international law because it has a different logic. It's like, if you give us security, we will sit to negotiate with you. That was the essence of the roadmap. And actually, to me, the roadmap was in a way to completely end what was supposed to be Palestinian resistance and, against the occupation. But I promise you to have a look at that thing. So all this with what I think that, in a diplomatic language or a bit academic, the EU had a narrow interpretation of the facts on the ground. What do we have today? Prolonged occupation, settler colonialism expanding, ethnic cleansing, and it is not what I am saying. I'm sure maybe you have read a lot of, especially the Israeli neo-historians who wrote a lot about ethnic cleansing. One of the most famous is Professor Ilan Pape, who is actually teaching at Exeter University, where I graduated from. Apartheid, and I'm not talking about apartheid, Human Rights Watch spoke about apartheid, ESQA spoke about apartheid, an Israeli NGO, B'Tselem, spoke about apartheid, so it is documented, and of course the International Court of Justice clearly referenced apartheid. Continuous impunity of Israel, and of course disregard of international law. And this is very important because if you look at the EU statements, especially regarding the relationship between the EU and the UN, the main focus is about respect for international law and enhancing human rights and peace building, etc. And whatever is happening is in complete contradiction to EU stated policies. But not only that, there's a continuous assault on UN institutions. As I said a week ago, I think that Israel decided that they expropriate the property where the UNRWA building is in East Jerusalem. And actually what is happening in Gaza now is that they are actually attacking all the UN institutions, schools where people are hiding, and they are bombing them. So in a way, this is an assault to the international order, not only those institutions. And I apologize, I don't have the exact figure of how many UN people died in the current Gaza war, whether international or national. Destruction of EU finance projects. Can you imagine how much the EU invested in Palestinian, between two converted common state building, airport, port, schools, universities, etc., so the list goes on. Just like a glimpse for you to know is that the multi-annual financial allocation for Palestine by the EU amounts to 1.177 billion euros. I think that Palestine is one of the highest receiving, supposedly, aid per human capital. So, where we are now is that the EU diplomatic rhetoric and financial aid did not help in the two-state solution. This is a slogan versus reality. Gaza is unlivable, and the West Bank struggles with the right-wing settlers who want to establish the Yehuda state in the West Bank. I think that, when I wrote this sentence, I was trying to think how can my English serve the best interpretation of how I see. And in the best case scenario, I think we can say there's a disregard of Israel's premeditated intention. Because for me, if you state something, and if you say this is my objective, and if the reality is not, this means that there's something wrong going in between. You see, I work in project management, and you set objectives, and then you see whether those objectives are achieved, and you do monitoring and evaluation, and you monitor if the objectives were achieved or not, and you evaluate, especially the impact of your objectives, and then you examine why your objectives were not achieved, and you try to think of better things in order to achieve your objectives. So basically, this whole political chaos in the world, I think they all lack project management skills, because it is true. This is why we see projects in the private sector succeeding, and projects in the political arena, they go open-ended. And this is the scary thing, that institutions and policymakers and politicians, they do, because they promise things only to get elected, and then they forget why they are here. And this is why it is, and I think that today we need to really reflect upon this widening gap between the people and governments and policymakers, people and institutions. So at the end, I think that the EU intentionally or unintentionally has actually undermined its initial position in the Venice Declaration, that again recognized the need to preserve Palestinian rights to self-determination and most importantly, safeguard the Palestinian people's territorial rights against Israel's expansion policy. So what peace process, what Palestinian state, and what is the present and what is the future? These are issues that we need to continue reflecting about. So I think that nobody is holding Israel after supposedly 56 years since 1967, 57 years of Israeli military occupation. Nobody is holding Israel accountable, and nobody is making any effort to putting an end to the occupation. When it comes to Gaza, it's been, 16 years of the Gaza blockade, but for me, I think it is even more. Because also, again, I want to bring to your attention a personal experience that you will not find in books. I remember exactly in 1991 that I, a resident of the West Bank, of Ramallah, the West Bank, I was not allowed to go to Jerusalem without a permit. They first started not allowing Palestinian cars from the West Bank into going into Jerusalem. So if I want to go to Bethlehem, from Ramallah to Bethlehem, which is like a straight line on the map, I cannot pass through Jerusalem. That started since 91. And these are the exemplifications of the policy of apartheid, like doing a lot of policies and restrictions. We have family in Beit Sahur and Bethlehem. We have to take a bypass road that takes us sometimes 2 hours, 3 hours, depending on the checkpoints, to get there. I mean, that distance was supposed to be like less than 45 minutes. So they started not allowing cars to get into Jerusalem, and then they started not allowing people, and now nobody goes into Jerusalem. And even sometimes, like, they give Christians or Muslims the right to go to the Church of Holy Sepulchre on Easter Day or for Ramadan, and they are putting a lot of conditions and restrictions, and people are not allowed to practice the religion or the right to freedom of movement. This is what we mean when we talk about, lack of respect of human rights or international law. So, lack of adherence of international humanitarian law, and as you see, live genocide since October 2023. And allow me to say, I'm not the one who created the term. It's also the International Court of Justice and a lot of people. So 90% of Gaza's current population of the 2.1 million people have been displaced, facing genocide, death, hunger, and actually annihilation. Continuous politicide as a result of the Israeli action in separating the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza. Politicide means it's like a different terminology, and that actually the first time I heard this term was by another Israeli historian, neo-historian, whose name is Baruch Kamerling. He wrote a book on politicide, and even though the inside of the book is not as strong as the title, but for me what really caught my attention is the word politicide. Politicide means that you are intentionally killing people's political life, culture, economy, and livelihood. And this is the result of what is going on regarding those policies. And of course, the settlement expansion, as I've said, in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, that intensified since 2003. There's a lot of information and details and numbers by international organizations that I encourage you to go visit if you are further interested in this. And I have said ending the role of UNRWA, ending the refugee issue, defying international law. I mean, this is such an obnoxious position that and I can see even in the UN, what is happening to the UN institutions now in trying to defy Israeli policies is like they are even not able to catch up with the new, attacks on the ground, because this is our life. The whole idea of doing ethnic cleansing or politicized or gradual ethnic cleansing is like you keep creating new facts on the ground that the people are finding it more and more difficult to cope with. Like if I need to go to my work in Jerusalem and I have to cross very humiliating checkpoints, I will think 10 times whether I want to take this job or not. I personally stopped going to visit Jerusalem because I don't want to see this humiliation anymore. But that's very dangerous, because if I start giving up, and a lot of people giving up, this means that I no longer have the courage to resist this policy. And this is the plan, is that they make you so tired of continuously creating new facts on the ground. So, as I've said, it is true that we have said in the beginning is that the EU's perception is a power for good, but there's nothing left of the two-state solution. In the best case scenario, we can say that there's a slogan, but we're not implementing the tools to implement it. And the tools are there in international law. So again, I also encourage you to really track the evolution of the EU position in terms of diplomacy, discourse, capacity, and also double standards. I mean, a lot of people speak about the EU's double standards, especially when the Ukraine crisis started. And I was shocked by continuously hearing a lot of EU officials saying that it is not the same. Even Borrell, he started when he was asked in 2002 about, why does the EU take stances regarding Ukraine different than Palestine? He immediately said these are two different issues. It is true that now he is the softest person in the Commission regarding the EU positions, but still, I mean, I do not see how different it is. And that actually, unfortunately, weakens the EU power as a power for good in the world when we talk about justice, human rights, equality, and also the implementation of international law. Because if you compare the EU's position after the Ukraine war and the sanctions that were enforced actually against Russia with the EU's reaction to the continuous Israeli war and aggression and occupation, it's completely different. So I wanted also to mention this, that there's a lot of talk, a lot of people talk about the impossibility of the two-state solution, even a one-state solution. But to my mind, I don't think that it is even happening, because actually there is one party that is dictating the situation on the ground now, and this one party neither wants a two-state solution nor a one-state solution, especially after the issuance of the nation-state law in Israel in 2018, which sees Israel exclusively for Jewish people, with also jeopardizing the present and the future also of Palestinians living in Israel, which are actually almost 1/5 of the population there. So I spoke a bit about the EU position, and this is what I've noticed, that there's like a multifaceted kind of division within the EU since 1980. But I think that the Gaza war, it unraveled a lot of things. For example, there are ingrained division between the EU member states, and we know this, like the usual supporters of Israel, and I can mention Germany, Holland, France, and Italy, and actually Germany, France, and Italy are actually contributing to the war in Gaza, which is unimaginable to my mind. And there are what we call the outliers, Ireland, but we also understand that a country like Ireland has affiliations with the pre-colonial life, so they understand what it means to be under occupation, they understand colonialism. as it is. And I have noticed also that the division is not only between the member states, but also within the EU institutions. And you can just look at the earliest statements. At the outbreak of the war, for example, we saw that both the President of the Commission and the President of the EU Parliament immediately went to Israel without having consulted with the member states, and not even, Joseph Borrell. Unfortunately, neither went to Gaza, not even Joseph Borrell. I mean, and I don't see it because, with almost 42,000 people killed, almost more than the estimation is more than 200,000 people under the rubble, and 90% of Gaza destroyed. And I did not see, other than the Prime Minister of Spain going to the borders on Gaza. I mean, nobody went there. So this, to my mind, is unimaginable. And I need to talk about this because, as I promised, I'm trying to bring my perspective as a Palestinian. And we feel strongly that there is a Holocaust legacy in Europe. Okay? For example, I know in Germany, one time I was traveling from Tunis to Tripoli in Libya, and I met a young German academic. Just like she was telling me that because of her support for the Palestinian cause, she is banned from teaching in Germany. She couldn't even go back to Germany because she is afraid of being arrested. Germany also banned a Greek politician, Yanis Varoufakis, from even taking part in an online Zoom meeting because he was speaking on behalf of Palestine. The Green Party in Germany is siding with Israel. This is like, who is the left in this world? We don't know. So, but what I wanted to say, and I would like to leave with you, is that this comparison is not fair. Because the Palestinians did not create the Holocaust. We did not. It's a Europe problem. So don't tell us, if we talk about Palestine, that we are anti-Semites. We are not the anti-Semites. It is the Christians of Europe who are anti-Semites. So, I know it is hard to talk about it, but I need to be true to my own, to my own perception of this reality. Well, I think that after this war especially, we have discovered that Israel is not a liberal democratic state. I mean, if we talk about supporting Israel, the only democracy in the world, I don't see how democracy meets with the continuing occupation, oppression, and killing people, unlawful killing of civilians. It is an exclusive Jewish state. It continues it is attempting to continue the project that started in 1948. And this is not this is not a slogan. This is based on facts. This is based on a lot of Israeli documents and a lot of statements by Israeli politicians. Even in the best case scenario, and this is also something that I didn't say, even Ilan Pappé said once that there is no right or left in Israel. They are all the same when it comes to seeing the Palestinians. It's like the left wanted the Palestinian state just to protect the Jewish state, not because they are interested in living side by side. So Israel has expansionist objectives. This is now what they're talking about, a country from the river to the sea. I'm sure as young people you've heard a lot of Palestinians talking about from the river to the sea, but it is not the same meaning as Israel means it. But we will see. But it might happen, by the way, because I think that if no action is, like we have 1 year and almost 1 more month after, the war on Gaza, nothing is happening. Israel is trying to replicate the same in Lebanon. They want to turn Lebanon, destroy everybody. They're hitting on civilians. In order to kill one suspect, they are bringing down, buildings. I mean, where is international law in this? So, but again, it is also hard, and I know that you are all young people and you have minds of your own, and I know that you also struggle. If you are Europeans, if you are internationals, you have your own struggles to get education, to have a stance about what is happening in the world, to draw your future. But I think that we have to state things the way they are, and think about how we want to think about them, not how we are being fed about these facts. So again, I think that the Gaza war has actually revealed a lot of things. Impotence of the current international system. Of course, there's a lot of people talking about a transitioning global system, and I think that the Gaza war has actually accelerated this, because, I mean, with a lot of people talking about, you know, the UN stance on international law, there are a lot of questions. So we no longer speak about failure to interpret facts on the ground, and I wanted to, you know, move a bit away from my diplomatic language in the beginning of the presentation. And I think that we need to strictly say failure to hold Israel accountable and responsible for the wrong things it has been doing for the Palestinians thus far. But I mean, in the reality of post-Gaza, I think also that there's, you know, a harder work on creating a culture of fear. And Palestinians were depicted as subhumans and terrorists. Uncivilized. And I think that this is a policy beyond what all the populist policies did to the public to gain their consent to crimes during the Second World War. Because I was trying to analyze, I mean, how can the people, you know, accept what is happening? Whether it is in Israel, like, how can they buy what the government is doing? And how can the world opinion and the world politicians, how can they be silent? Okay, there is discourse, but there is no action. And I was trying to think, what is happening? I mean, can we make a comparison about how the German people, you know, consented to Israel's, you know, policies, and what he did not only to Jews but also to Polish people and Gypsies, etc. What made the people silent? And those are the issues that we need to reflect upon. Of course, I mean, a lot of people go along with this idea, and you can hear it in a lot of statements of politicians, that the war is between good and evil, civilization and barbarism. It is us and them, you know? It is us, Europe, the civilized world, and them, you know, those... and this continues to be transfixing to me. I mean, in the 21st century, 75 years after the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and we are going back to square zero again. This is unimaginable. Okay, I will finish. So, I just wanted to quickly talk about the war in Gaza, and especially also what is going on. I think that, you know, I spoke about international organizations talking about apartheid, but there are proof about Israel's, you know, policies against international law. We saw the International Court of Justice ruling on the genocide. Of course, quickly, when the case was brought to the court, a lot of people were happy, because at least you see, and I remember what the South African Minister of Foreign Affairs said. She said something very strong that I still remember. She said, for the first time, we are using the same tools of the colonizers that they created, we are using them against them. And after the last elections in South Africa, I was a bit afraid, because we have more of a right-wing government in South Africa. I was afraid that they will not continue, but I have learned that they are bringing the case again to the International Court of Justice. It will be, because what they say, you see, the memorial will show the court and prove that genocide is being committed. Because in the ruling in January, the ruling was plausible genocidal acts by Israel. But now they said that actually the genocide has been proven. The good thing is that there are new countries, joining the case. We also have the ICC. I mean, we're talking about international law, and this is something that is very evident, especially for the EU. And time will tell if many of the EU countries will actually issue warrant arrest against Israelis, being accused of committing genocidal acts. The ICJ, again, I mean, and this is something very important that you might be interested in looking at, in that there was a new ruling of the ICJ on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territories. And that ruling ordered that Israel should, actually, the UN General Assembly ordered that Israel has end its occupation within 1 year. I also wanted to let you know who are the countries who were against. Many countries actually voted for that, 124 nations, but countries like Germany, Italy, Cyprus, France, Sweden, Greece, Spain, Switzerland, Denmark, and the UK were against this thing. So, this whole thing is we're talking about also countries in Europe. Germany continues to fund the Israeli, military operations in the West, in the Gaza Strip. But I said that there are outliers, Ireland and some European politicians like Dominique de Villepin, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Varoufakis, Spanish and Belgian ministers. But for example, when we talk about later, I wanted to resume a bit about the EU within the global system because I don't think that we can look only at the EU without really understanding what is going on in the world. For example, not only that the international system is in transition and the widening gap between the global south and global north, but I think also that, there's, what worries me most actually is the amplification of the right in the world. For example, if you look back at the French elections experience and, the right, the left winning the elections but still not in power, and you look at the way that Mélenchon was being attacked all the time because he was speaking for the Palestinian cause, or Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. This for me is very alarming, and not only points at the gap between the governments and the people, but also about the legitimacy of political action even in countries like Europe. So I think that you will see all those issues that I'm talking about, and I think that there are lots of questions that this war on Gaza has brought up. Also, the main thing that really worries me is that I think that we are still living within the colonial periphery. If there is no ending of the Israeli settler colonial, activities and project in Palestine, we will still revolve around this colonial thing. So, as I've said, we are talking about us and them, civilization and not civilization, deep institutions in the world and Europe. But when it comes to Palestine, I also need to point your attention to this. I personally think that it is bigger. Even it is something that is bigger than international law, because if you look at what is happening and the way a lot of people are looking at Gaza now, it is something that is beyond Gaza. There's a lot of stories about gas in the shores of Gaza and the Abraham agreements between Israel and the Gulf countries, also gas and power against Russia, etc. So also have a look at this issue in addition to what I've said. So I wanted also to give you a perspective into the future. We really need to reflect, especially not only about the internal dynamics about the EU common foreign policy, but I think that most importantly, I think that in order for Europe to be effective and true to its discourse, there needs to be a reconciliation with the European past, present, and future. There is a strong need to think of the next generation beyond the Marshall Plan, because we know that the way the EU foreign policy is being shaped is being sort of part of the transatlantic policy, and if Europe continues to stay like this, it's never going to be a real global actor or regional actor. Just like I remember, because I was working with a lot of European officials, one time I said to a very high European official, let's do an initiative for Europe. And he said, well, I have to go and ask permission from the US. This is what he told me. I will never forget this. Yeah, life is difficult. So, are there actions for the EU to be on the right side of history? The right side of history now is saying that we have to stand for justice, for equality for all. And this is what the demonstrations, the student demonstrations in the US with the new youth movements and in Europe, this is what the new youth is calling for. It's also emancipation from a lot of things. And I don't envy you, as like you will be going into the work market. You will be facing a lot of problems in the future. I have my nephew in the US. He was born in the US. He participated in a demonstration. He was taken into court and he was put on probation at the university, even though he is an A+ student. A lot of people are very scared. There's a lot of terrorizing of students, of professors, taking a stance for Palestine. And I don't envy you. I'm sure that you will face a lot of this, even in Europe, because I know that there are deep institutions at the political, economic, business, even academic, and also cultural levels, and media, of course. So you have to, I don't know how much courage you will be able to have, and I don't know how much you can afford your courage in order to forge a better future in the midst of this, deeply ingrained attack on justice. Well, I want to stop here, and I apologize for being a bit like courage or fear. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't bore you. It's too much information.
No, Lily, so thank you very much. And now let's open the floor immediately to your questions, comments, and so on. Lily is ready to address them. We have a few minutes, so please don't be shy. Take the mic and so on. Yes, there is a question here.
I really appreciate your lecture. It was very thoughtful and factful, and with lots of emotions I can feel it. Realizing the fact of the long persisting instability in the Middle East region. Like, there are some reasons always been in the conflict, especially focusing on the Israel and the Palestinian geography. So there are so many victims of this crisis of humanitarian crimes and all. So do the victims of Israel and Palestine really have the faith in the Western world to do they realize that Western world will come for them and but not focusing on the religious aspect, but especially on the victims, because when there is a crisis, there are no religion, there is just the victims. So focusing on that fact, that why like victims there really faith in the international order, or especially the Western world, Eurocentric world or US world? Do they really like appreciate or get assurance from this world that they will come for the peace, and a part of their theories and the policies they are creating, they are investing in the region? Do you really think?
What's your name and where are you from?
I am from India and I am here on Erasmus. My name is Vedant Gaur.
Any other question?
Okay, thank you very much, first of all, for your exposition.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Celeste. I'm a student from Argentina, from UNTREF, Universidad Nacional de 3 de Febrero. And as an Argentinian girl, I would like to ask you how important is for you as a Palestinian the support from the countries from the global south, especially Latin American countries?
First of all, I would like to express my solidarity to you and all Palestinian people, and thank you for your lecture. I'm Sole from the University of Torino, and I would like to ask you, if I understood correctly, you don't think the two-state solution made through negotiation is feasible, but I would like to ask you if you think it's still the right solution to reach through other means. If yes, if you think it's still feasible after all that has happened this year, after the genocide and everything, and if no, if you think there is another solution which might be better. Thank you.
Okay. Further questions? Maybe one more because we are running out of time. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, I am Pierpaolo Sammartino from University of Torino. I have a question regarding one of your slides about Israel, the expansionist attempt of Israel. You talked about greater Israel, and you mentioned some states like Lebanon, Jordan, but also Saudi Arabia. So it was something interesting, and I would like to ask you to explain me this concept of Greater Israel. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Lily. Okay.
Thank you very much for your question. Regarding the Eurocentric world, I think that we are still evolving in the Eurocentric world, because actually the Palestine problem was a Europe creation. We did not. We did not create it. We did not do the Holocaust. We did not do anti-Semitism. The Palestine issue was sort of a solution to the anti-Semitism problem in Europe. Because it's a European creation, there is a need for Europe to reconcile with its past, only by providing a just and equitable solution for the Palestinians. Regarding your question about the Islamic world, the Islamic world is not something easy. Of course, the population in the Islamic world is far bigger than Europe, for example. In Europe, there is 500 people, and you know the divisions. So we're not talking about Sunni or Shia or one Islamic world or even Arab world. And I think that there is solidarity, but it is evident that there's a wide gap between governments and the people. It's the same problem as it is in the West. This is how I see it. And nobody is claiming. For example, one of the issues, when it comes to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You see, Al-Aqsa Mosque is human heritage, and nobody is allowed to go and visit the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You see, when we talk about freedom to practice religion and open movements, etc. So there's a lot that needs to be done, especially when it comes to solidarity movement. I have noticed that there is less action, even by the youth in the Muslim world. And I don't understand why and what is happening. And maybe this is something that you can research and try to figure out why it is happening this way and what can be done, in comparison to solidarity, the youth solidarity movement in Europe. Regarding the global south, Celeste, I think Nicaragua and Colombia just joined the ICJ second case against Israel. But I think that what happened, this is why I think that the Gaza war is a turning point in the transforming global order, because it's redefining, hopefully the momentum will continue, it's redefining the relationship between the global north and the global south. But having said this, there will be continuous resistance from the global north, because the global north is actually, the imperial global north is actually having its foot in the global south. Remember what happened between France and many countries in Africa? I worked in Niger. Just like to give you an idea, at the time when I worked there in 2019, 2020, I learned that the French government signed an agreement with the country to extract uranium for 50 years without giving anything in advance. And the strike was dealt without the approval of the parliament. That tells you a lot. But now Niger has kicked the French out of Niger. So, but the problem is in countries like Niger, there are newcomers, the China and the US, so it's not really getting rid of the colonial power. But again, I think that the ICJ ruling gave a lot of hope that, as I said, like in the words of the South African Minister of Foreign Affairs, that now we have learned to use the tools that you have created in order to control us. But there's a lot of, but there will be resistance, because there will be resistance in terms of trade, in terms of aid, etc. It depends on how much a country can really resist. So, but it is your turn now. You will be the decision makers of the future. It depends on how far you can go. And this is why I said courage against fear. So regarding the two-state solution, it is not possible, to tell you frankly. As I said, no two-state solution, no one-state solution. The future does not look good, because the way I see it, if no action is going to be taken to stop Israel from its impunity, there will be more ethnic cleansing. In the West Bank, people are very scared that Israel will start massive deportation of people living in the West Bank. Jordan is afraid of this type of massive deportation. I don't know what the future will hold, but it doesn't seem to end. This is the scary part. And if it doesn't end here, it's going to spread in the region and in the world. And it's going to influence Europe within itself and for itself in the future. Nobody is looking at it, but it is coming. There's, there are theories about, symptoms of the current, symptoms of an ending colonial power, Israel as a settler colonial power. And these theories, they say, okay, if they continue to be acting in a more vicious way, because they want to maintain their power, this means that it's the start of the end. I don't subscribe to this theory, because my reading is more factual rather than futuristic. So we will see how this ends. And I'm sorry, I can't. And actually, one thing to point, in the South African case to the ICJ, in their memorial, they have spoken extensively about 75 years of apartheid and oppression. In this, they included, Palestinians living within Israel today. And to me, this is extremely significant, because this is the core of the conflict. It is a clear theft of people's land, country lives over 75 years. Regarding the expansionist Israel, even though, what is your name again, sorry?
My question was
I know. So, solid, yes, sorry. Now you hear it actually, I just saw a video about Smotrich, who is a colonial minister in the current Israeli government, and he was talking about his concept of Greater Israel, because he is actually basing this on the biblical reference. For him, Jerusalem goes beyond Jerusalem. It gets to Saudi Arabia. And by the way, the Abraham Accords with the Gulf countries, they will reach to that point. But even though this is like a statement by a religious leader referencing the biblical thing, which is another issue that we can talk about, the Israeli policies have been like this. If you remember, like in 1967, Israel occupied also parts of, it occupied parts of Egypt that the Egyptians got back in Camp David in 1978, and parts of Syria, the Golan Heights. What happened, even though it is considered occupied by international law, Trump recognized Israel's sovereignty on the Golan Heights. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital, the eternal capital of Israel, even though it is occupied under international law. But this tells you that actually the expansionist Israeli policies beyond what is Palestine is something that is being planned. It is a project. And actually, again, funny, Trump said a couple of months ago that the current geography of Israel is too small. Israel has to expand to the other regions. And this is my reading, that the current Israel has colonial imperial expansionist policies. And again, if no action is being done, maybe time will tell where we will be later. I hope this answered the question.
Okay, so our time is over. So thank you.